Ethan Cole never meant it as anything more than a joke. He had been standing in the copy room late one evening, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, trying to fix a stubborn printer that refused to cooperate. Clara West had stepped in, sharp and polished as always, the kind of woman who seemed to move through the building without ever actually touching the ground. He'd looked up at her exhausted, ink on his fingers, and said with a tired half-smile, "If this thing jams one more time, I might just marry you for the benefits." She had paused. Most people would have laughed politely and kept walking. Clara didn't laugh. She looked at him for a long second, really looked at him, and then she smiled. Not the corporate smile she wore in meetings, not the tight, careful one that kept investors comfortable. This one was quiet, almost private. "Be careful what you joke about, Mr. Cole," she'd said softly. He thought about that smile later that night while washing dishes in his small kitchen. Lily's homework spread across the table. He didn't know why it stayed with him. Maybe because Clara West rarely looked at anyone like that. 2 weeks later, she asked him to walk with her during Richard Palmer's birthday party. 2 nights after that, she stood by a dark pond under string lights and said 6 words that knocked the air out of him. "I need you to marry me tonight." Now, months later, Ethan sometimes sat on the back steps of Clara's large glass house and wondered how a joke in a copy room had turned into this life. He had not meant to fall in love. He had meant to sign papers, protect a company, take the money, secure Lily's future, leave quietly when the 6 months were up. That had been the plan. Plans, he'd learned, were fragile things. The first night he slept in Clara's house, he had lain awake staring at a ceiling that didn't feel like his. The mattress was too soft, the silence too deep. He could hear the hum of a refrigerator somewhere far away, and the faint click of Clara's office door closing down the hall. He had told Lily it was temporary. He had told Clara it was business. He had told himself it was practical. But there was something about the way Clara set a plate of badly burned pancakes in front of Lily that first Sunday morning that didn't feel practical at all. She had stood there, unsure, waiting for judgment. Lily had drowned the pancakes in syrup and declared them edible. Clara had laughed. It was the first time Ethan saw her relax without calculation. That laugh had done something to him. He began noticing small things. The way Clara always turned off lights behind her, as if she carried the habit of being careful from childhood. The way she listened to Lily, truly listened even when she didn't understand the subject. The way she sat on the edge of the pool one afternoon, shoes off, staring at the water like she wasn't sure what to do with free time. She was brilliant in boardrooms. She was lost in kitchens. And somewhere between gala speeches and burned pancakes, Ethan stopped pretending. He didn't know exactly when it happened. Only that one evening, when Clara rested her head briefly against his shoulder after a long day, it no longer felt like an act. It felt like home. And that terrified him, because the contract said 6 months, and love wasn't part of the agreement. Part 1 total, 520 words. The first crack in the arrangement didn't come from the board. It came from Lily. She stood in the kitchen one evening, arms folded, watching Clara struggle with a jar of pasta sauce. "You know," Lily said, "most people tap the lid with a spoon first." Clara paused, jar in both hands. That would have been useful information about 30 seconds ago. Lily walked over, tapped the lid twice, twisted, and it opened easily. She handed it back without a word. Clara looked at the jar, then at Lily. "You're going to have to teach me things." Lily shrugged. "Only if you're staying." The question hung there. Ethan felt it settle heavy in the room. Clara didn't answer right away. She poured the sauce into the pan, slow and careful, as if choosing her words mattered more than the recipe. "I don't like starting things I don't plan to finish," she said quietly. Lily nodded once, as if filing that away. That night, after Lily went upstairs, Ethan found Clara standing in the backyard. The pool lights cast pale blue shadows across the grass. She had her arms wrapped around herself, though it wasn't cold. "You didn't have to say that," he said gently. "Which part?" "The staying part." Clara exhaled slowly. "I'm tired of temporary things, Ethan." He understood that. Temporary jobs, temporary security, temporary peace after Sarah's diagnosis. Life had a way of pulling the rug out just when you got comfortable. They stood there in silence, listening to the quiet hum of the house behind them. "Victor called an emergency board session," Clara said finally. "He's pushing hard, he's questioning our timeline, suggesting this was strategic." "It was strategic," Ethan said softly. "Yes," she replied, "but it isn't only that anymore." She turned toward him then, and there was no CEO in her eyes. No calculation, just a woman who was tired of fighting alone. "I don't want to lose the company," she said, "but I don't want to lose this either." Ethan felt something steady rise in him. Not panic, not fear. Resolve. "We won't," he said. "We'll show them it's real. And if they dig, then we give them nothing to find." The next few days became a quiet rehearsal of real life. They cooked together. Not well, but together. They argued once over how to fold towels. Clara folded them like a hotel. Ethan folded them like someone who cared more about fitting them in a drawer. They laughed halfway through the disagreement. Lily started leaving her soccer cleats by the front door again instead of lining them neatly in her room. It was a small rebellion, but it meant she felt comfortable. One evening, Clara came home late from the office, shoulders heavy. Ethan was on the couch helping Lily with math. Clara paused in the doorway, watching them. Something softened in her face. "Long day?" Ethan asked. "The longest." She kicked off her heels and sat beside him, not across, not at a distance. "Beside?" Lily leaned her head against Clara's arm without thinking. Clara froze for half a second. Then she relaxed. Ethan saw it clearly in that moment. This wasn't performance anymore. This was three people learning the shape of each other's lives. And when Clara reached for his hand later that night, there were no cameras, no board members, no contracts, just warmth. And for the first time since that copy room joke, Ethan stopped counting the months. The board meeting was set for Monday morning. Clara barely slept the night before. Ethan could feel it in the way she lay beside him, still and awake, her breathing too measured. Around 2 a.m, he reached for her hand under the covers. "You're counting worst-case scenarios," he murmured. "I always do. And? In most of them, Victor wins." Ethan turned onto his side. Even in the dim light from the hallway, he could see the worry lining her face. "You built that company from the ground up," he said quietly. "You didn't do that by folding under pressure." She let out a small, tired laugh. "This isn't about folding, it's about proof. He's saying we married for convenience." "We did," Ethan said honestly. Clara's hand tightened in his. "But that's not all it is anymore." Silence settled between them. "Is it?" she asked. Ethan didn't rush the answer. "No," he said finally. "It isn't." Monday morning came gray and sharp. Lily ate her cereal slowly, watching both of them with careful eyes. She was quiet in a way that meant she understood more than she let on. "Big day?" she asked Clara. "Very." Lily nodded. "You'll be fine." Clara smiled softly. "How do you know?" "Because you get that face when you're nervous," Lily said, pointing with her spoon. "But you still go anyway." Ethan almost laughed. Clara leaned over and kissed the top of Lily's head. "Thank you." The boardroom felt colder than usual. Victor laid out his case in calm, polished language. He questioned the speed of the marriage, the timing, the lack of public history. He suggested it was a calculated maneuver to satisfy the trust. Ethan sat beside Clara, hands folded, saying nothing. When it was Clara's turn to speak, she didn't rush. "Yes," she said clearly. "The marriage was sudden. Yes, the timing aligned with my grandfather's trust. I won't pretend those facts don't exist." Victor leaned back, satisfied. "But what Victor cannot prove," Clara continued, "is intent, because he doesn't know us." She turned toward Ethan, not for show but for steadiness. "We did marry quickly, and somewhere between legal paperwork and public scrutiny, we built something real. I'm not divorcing him in 6 months. I'm not walking away once the trust clears. This isn't temporary." A quiet murmur spread through the room. Victor's expression shifted, not anger. Calculation. The vote was taken. The investigation was denied. It wasn't a landslide victory, but it was enough. Outside the building, Clara stood very still on the steps. The city noise moved around them. "It's over," Ethan said gently. "For now." She looked at him then, not as a partner in strategy, but as a partner. "You didn't hesitate in there," she said. "Neither did you." Clara stepped closer. "We crossed a line today. I know. No more pretending." Ethan felt the weight of that settle in his chest. "No more pretending," he agreed. And for the first time since she'd asked him to marry her, Clara kissed him without fear. Not to convince a board, not to silence doubt, just because she wanted to. Up her. Life didn't suddenly become simple after the board meeting. Victor quieted down, but he didn't disappear. The press moved on to other stories, but whispers lingered. Clara still worked long hours. Ethan still felt out of place in rooms where money moved faster than conversation. But inside the house, something had shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It was small. Clara began coming home earlier when she could. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. One Tuesday evening, Ethan found her sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with Lily, trying to understand a history project about ancient Rome. "So Julius Caesar was stabbed by all his friends?" Clara asked, confused. "Kind of," Lily said patiently. "It was more political than personal." Clara blinked. "That sounds familiar." Ethan leaned in the doorway watching them. Clara's hair was tied back loosely. She was still in her work clothes, but her jacket was off, sleeves rolled. She looked comfortable. Not polished, comfortable. Later that night, after Lily went upstairs, Clara stayed on the couch instead of retreating to her office. "I forgot what normal evenings feel like," she admitted softly. "Messy and loud?" Ethan asked. "Steady," she corrected. They sat in quiet. "You could have walked away," Clara said after a while. "After the board vote. You could have said you'd done your part." Ethan looked at her. "And go back to pretending this meant nothing?" She didn't answer. He reached for her hand. "I don't stay out of obligation," he said. "I stay because I want to." Clara studied him carefully like she was searching for doubt. She didn't find it. The next weekend, they drove back to Ethan's old house to collect a few remaining things. It still smelled faintly of detergent and old wood. Lily ran upstairs to grab a forgotten soccer trophy. Clara stood in the living room, taking in the smallness of it. "You raised her here," she said quietly. "Yeah. You and Sarah?" Ethan nodded. There was no jealousy in Clara's voice, only respect. "She would have liked you," he said. Clara didn't look at him. "I don't want to replace her." "You're not." He stepped closer. "You're not filling a space, you're building something new." Clara finally met his eyes. There was vulnerability there she rarely allowed anyone to see. On the drive back, Lily fell asleep in the back seat. Clara rested her hand on Ethan's knee. "This still scares me," she admitted. "Good," he said. She frowned slightly. "Good? If it didn't scare us, it wouldn't matter." Clara smiled faintly. When they pulled into the driveway, the house didn't feel like Clara's anymore. It felt like theirs. And that difference was no longer part of a contract. It was something chosen again and again in quiet moments no one else ever saw. It was Lily who changed the word. They had been sitting at the kitchen island on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Clara was attempting pancakes again. Less burned this time, though still uneven. Ethan was reading through emails, half listening to the sound of batter hitting the pan. Lily slid into her chair and said, without looking up from her phone, "Mom, you forgot the vanilla." The word landed softly. Clara froze. Ethan looked up slowly. Lily blinked, realizing what she'd said. A faint blush crept up her cheeks. "I mean, Clara, Clara set the spatula down carefully. "You can call me whatever feels right," she said gently. "There's no pressure." Lily hesitated. "I didn't mean it like replacing anything." "I know," Clara said, "and I'm not trying to replace anyone." Ethan watched the exchange with a tightness in his chest he hadn't expected. Lily shrugged, still avoiding eye contact. "It just came out." Clara stepped around the counter and knelt slightly so she was closer to Lily's level. "If it ever feels right to say it again," she said softly, "I'll be here." There were tears in Clara's eyes, though she tried to blink them away. Later that evening, after Lily had gone upstairs, Ethan found Clara sitting alone in the dim light of the living room. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, but her voice betrayed her. "I didn't think that would mean so much." "It does," Ethan said quietly, "because it's real." Clara leaned back against the couch cushions, staring at the ceiling. "I've spent my whole life earning titles: CEO, director, chairwoman. I worked so hard for them." She swallowed. "And that one just happened." Ethan sat beside her. "You didn't earn it," he said. "You grew into it." The house had begun to change. Photos had started appearing on shelves. Not staged corporate portraits, but candid snapshots. Lily laughing by the pool. Ethan asleep on the couch with a book on his chest. Clara mid-laugh, hair unpolished and free. The rooms felt warmer, less curated, more lived in. One night, Ethan woke to find Clara sitting upright beside him, staring into the dark. "Bad dream," he murmured. She nodded faintly. "I keep thinking it's going to fall apart. That I'll wake up and this will be gone." Ethan reached for her hand. "We built this," he said softly. "It didn't happen by accident." She lay back down, closer this time. "I never meant to fall in love with you," she whispered. "I know, but I'm glad I did." Ethan pressed his forehead to hers. "So am I." And somewhere in the quiet, the last part of the contract, unspoken but always lingering, finally faded away. There was no 6-month clock anymore, no exit plan. Just a life they were choosing every morning when they woke up beside each other. Spring came slowly that year. The trees around the house budded one cautious branch at a time, as if they too weren't sure winter was finished. The air softened. Windows stayed open longer. The house felt lighter. One evening, Ethan found Clara in the backyard with Lily, both of them sitting cross-legged on the grass. "What's going on?" he asked. "Planning," Lily said seriously. "For what?" Ethan smiled. "For your wedding." Ethan blinked. "We already had one." Lily rolled her eyes. "That doesn't count. That was paperwork. I mean a real one, with flowers and music and something that doesn't smell like courthouse cleaner." Clara looked almost shy. "I may have mentioned that the first ceremony wasn't exactly romantic." "You think?" Ethan said gently. Lily leaned back on her hands. "If you're staying married, and you are, right?" Clara glanced at Ethan. "We are," she said steadily. "Then you deserve something better," Lily finished. Ethan sat down beside them. The grass felt cool under his palms. "What would this better version look like?" he asked. Lily grinned. "Small. Outside. Maybe by the lake at that retreat place. And I get to pick the cake." Clara laughed softly. "Of course you do." The idea settled over them like something inevitable, not flashy, not for headlines, just theirs. That night, after Lily went to bed, Clara and Ethan stood by the kitchen sink, drying dishes.
"I never imagined I'd want a wedding," Clara said quietly. "The first one felt like survival. This one would feel like..."
"Choice," Ethan finished. She nodded. "I want to promise things I actually mean," she said, "not just recite them." Ethan set the towel down. "You already do," he said, "every day." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Stay," she said simply. "I'm not going anywhere." She stepped closer, resting her forehead against his chest. "I used to measure my life in quarters," she murmured. "Deadlines, projections. Now I measure it in evenings. Pancakes, soccer games." "You don't miss the old way?" "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not more than I value this." They moved through the weeks with a quiet steadiness. Clara stepped back from a few committees. She delegated more. She came home before sunset when she could. Ethan shifted roles at work, not because he needed status, but because balance mattered now. Lily adjusted in ways children often do, slowly, carefully, but fully. She left notes on the fridge. She complained about homework. She asked Clara for help choosing outfits. One afternoon, as Ethan watched the two of them argue gently over frosting flavors, he realized something. There was no performance left. No cameras, no boardroom tension, just 3 people, slightly imperfect, trying their best. And when Clara caught his eye across the kitchen and smiled, not carefully, not strategically, just warmly, Ethan understood something simple and certain. The joke in the copy room had changed his life, but it was the quiet days after that truly made it worth it. They held the second wedding in early summer. No press, no board members, no crystal chandeliers, just a small circle of chairs by the lake where the retreat had once forced them to perform love in front of strangers. This time there was no performance. Lily walked between them before the ceremony began, adjusting Clara's simple white dress and straightening Ethan's tie with exaggerated seriousness. "You both look nervous," she announced. "We are," Clara admitted. "Good," Lily said. "That means it matters." The officiant was an old friend of Richard Palmer's who had agreed to keep things quiet. The guests were few: Mrs. Yates, a couple of close colleagues who had become friends, and Richard himself, who stood with a look of quiet satisfaction. The lake reflected the sky like polished glass. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he didn't pull out notes. "I married you once because I thought it was the right thing to do," he said, voice steady but soft. "I'm marrying you again because I can't imagine not choosing you." Clara's eyes filled. "You asked me to save your company," he continued. "But you saved something in me too. I thought my life was already written. I thought love had been something I'd had once and lost. I didn't expect to find it again, especially not in a boardroom hallway." A small ripple of laughter moved through the group. Clara took a breath before speaking. "I built my life on control," she said, "on preparation, on knowing exactly what comes next. And then one night, I asked a man I barely knew to marry me." She smiled at him, I expected paperwork. I expected strategy. I did not expect kindness, or patience, or a man who would sit on the kitchen floor helping my stepdaughter with math while I learned how not to burn pancakes. Lily beamed at the word stepdaughter. You were never part of the plan, Clara said gently. But you became the best part of my life. They exchanged rings again. This time the metal felt warm from their hands. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan didn't hesitate. He kissed her slowly, without fear, without urgency, just certainty. Later that evening, as the sun lowered behind the trees, they sat on the dock together. Lily dangled her feet in the water. Clara leaned into Ethan's shoulder. Do you ever think about that joke? She asked softly. All the time. You could have laughed it off. So could you. They sat there, listening to the quiet lap of water against wood. Life hadn't become perfect. There were still long workdays. Still arguments about towels. Still moments of doubt. But there was also this steady evenings, shared coffee in the morning, a teenager who now called Clara Mom without thinking twice. Ethan watched the light fade over the lake and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement, not relief. Peace. He squeezed Clara's hand gently. Sometimes the life you plan isn't the life you're meant to live. And sometimes, the joke you make in passing becomes the promise you keep forever. If this story lingered with you, stay a while. There's always another quiet chapter waiting just beyond the porch.